Hello, everybody. I'm Joel Godi, the founder of NeuroGifted, a company that promotes neuro-inclusion in workplace and educational settings. Today, we are going to be talking about neurodiversity in educational and vocational settings with three amazing people. First, Sara-Louise Ackrill, who's the founder of Wired Differently. Suzan, Issa, the neurodiversity expert and emotional regulation coach. And Natasha, Hickling, an ADHD coach and founder of the Indigo Hub. So I will let them introduce themselves as we start. That would be much better. But with a panel like this, of course, it's going to be a very interesting conversation. So welcome, Sarah, Suzan, and Natasha to the Neurodiversity India Summit. So tell us about yourselves, your current interests, and how you came to where you are today in the neurodiversity space.
Okay, hi everybody. It's really exciting to be here and working with people who are over in South Asia. A real fan of South Asian culture. My name is Sara-Louise Ackrill. I'm a therapist. It's my main skill set. But I'm also a social entrepreneur with 9 different projects in neurodiversity, and I'm a team of 14 across the UK and 1 in Portugal. So thanks for having me.
Wonderful. And Suzan?
I'm Suzan Issa. I'm an emotional regulation coach. I work at the moment, it's mainly focused with families and education settings and local authorities, so bigger education settings within the UK. And we're a team of either 5 or 32 if you include the tutors we've just brought on board. So it's exciting time. And thank you ever so much for having us here.
Hi, I'm Natasha Hickling. I'm an ADHD life coach, but I used to be a teacher and a Senko in education. I used to also work in Asia. I worked in Asia for 6 years in China and Malaysia. So very excited to be here, very close to my heart. I work at Indigo Hub, and it's just a team of 1, just me. And I specialize in teens and young adults and families. So it's really great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, all of you, for being here. So we'll go again in the same order. So can you please tell us a little bit more about why you are in this space, neurodiversity? There's so many things that you could have done, right? So what brought you here in your life or in your career?
So my very first therapeutic client was neurodivergent. They were in a really bad time in their life. They were trying to commit suicide, and the professionals around them were diagnosing them with mental health conditions and not seeing their neurodivergent conditions. And I got an email 4 years later to say, we got it right, Sarah, I am neurodivergent, and this is what was going on all the time. I actually didn't know I was neurodivergent until only 6 years ago when I was 38. But somehow in the middle, I just sort of worked with people who were unseen, I think. And I think over time I specialized. And I generally see people who are autistic with ADHD. A lot of our projects at Wired Differently cater more for people with ADHD, actually, particularly our virtual assistant service. But over the time, my interests have changed. I would say I went into it. I'm very interested, for example, in domestic violence and abuse. I'm also increasingly interested in education and university setting, because meeting people like Natasha and Suzan has shown me that the missing piece of the pie that the social and care and health sectors aren't seeing is the expertise in the education sector. And I wish all the sectors would speak, because knowing people like Natasha and Suzan has vastly improved efficient outcomes, because generally therapists don't collaborate with people from education, and not a lot of educational people go into therapy and coaching. So that crossover has been great. And lately I've been really concerned about some of my clients. I started in Harley Street in June. Harley Street is known over here as being where the sort of the royals and celebrities go for their healthcare. So I suppose it's a name over here, but essentially that's brought a lot of people into my life who come from different backgrounds and who are quite often, university students. And the crisis we have here in universities and schools over lack of support is really worrying me, and that is becoming a special interest of mine.
Excellent. And from you, Suzan?
It's always very interesting because I have a background. I'm an ex-head teacher, ex-Senko, similar to Natasha, and I was in the education system for about 20 years. And it's always very interesting when we know how ahead of the curve education is, yet it's still so far behind. And while there's been so much, and it's always been interesting to me when I'm having these conversations with people outside of education, about the simple strategies that can work and all the things that can work. But knowing that from the inside, education is, so my own story is I stopped going to school when I was 11 years old. I wasn't able to attend for all the reasons that the children that we go in trying to help couldn't attend. I had the luxury of being left alone, but now if you skip school, everyone knows about it and everyone has to have an opinion on it. So it's a whole different world. But I came into this field, when I first started in education, I didn't know I was autistic. I didn't know I had 3 autistic children. I'm autistic. I have 3 ADHD children as well. So we've all got both. And to me, it was just how you raise children. It was a really simple, kind of all the constructs behind it. And I had this image of being able to change education from the inside. And one of my bylines became the greatest reasonable adjustment is an adjustment of the mindset. I felt like there was a lack of will to change, forget the resources, forget everything else. Yes, we have a resources crisis. Yes, we have lots and lots of issues with that. However, there is a mentality of, if it's not broken, don't fix it. And a real mentality of the onus is on the unseen to fix themselves. And so, yeah, about 3 years ago, very similar. I had a young girl who had just left our care. And I was told it wasn't within our remit to help her. And the parents were desperate. She was suicidal. And me, with my ADHD impulsivity, went, well, I quit. Got to the top of the road and remembered I had 3 children to pay for on my own and a roof scoop over their head. And then 2 weeks later, lockdown hit, and it kind of, and so, but it snowballed, and we've grown from there. And this young girl will be our first apprentice in the next 3 months or so. Mm-hmm. So it's a beautiful coming full circle, because so that's my passion. I do believe that it's either we're saving lives or saving children from lives unlived. And that's my absolute passion, and it's bridging that gap. It's bridging the gap in the most compassionate way. I get concerned when it becomes about hating the other side, or it's about having that conversation. It's about bridging and mutual understanding and support, and that's my passion, and that's what keeps me in it. I currently focus largely on parenting and young people, but fundamentally my passion is relationships. So I do a little bit of relationship counselling and adults and relationships with themselves when they discover that got ADHD, you're not lazy, and re-exploring that. So that's kind of the key of and the heart of what I'm trying to achieve.
Wonderful. That's great. And Natasha.
Well, that really got to me. It's just, I just love hearing and seeing people's passions as they speak about this topic, because my doctor, when I was diagnosed with ADHD, said to me, oh, well, your neurodivergent story starts now. And I was like, what? Starts now at 27? No, it started when I was a child. And I, similar to kind of Suzan and Sarah, but I was that 16-year-old that struggled to that point. And I was that one that got diagnosed with OCD and anxiety, but didn't really get told what to do with it. So I went into education because I wanted to help kind of children, but I didn't know that I was neurodivergent at the time. I just wanted to help because I never had that. I had this, you've got to get this, you've got to get A's, you've got to do this, you've got to do that. But no one taught me how to do it that was right for me. It was always forcing myself, but because I was trying to force myself, the anxiety and the OCD came out. And it wasn't until I was at university, when I was diagnosed with dyslexia and dyspraxia, that things started to open up for me. And then when I became a teacher, I really, really tried to help those children. But yet again, the system didn't work for me, and it didn't work for them. So after 2 years, I got frustrated, and I kind of did what Suzan did. I quit. I remember one day, had enough, fought over this child, and I had enough, and I quit. And then I went to Asia, and it really opened my eyes. And that's where I was actually diagnosed with ADHD. And about 2 months ago, I was diagnosed with autism. So I was diagnosed with ADHD when I was in Asia, and over there I was at the Senko, and I that's where I really started to see it. And I got a coach myself, and I was like, wow, this is where I can make the change in the individual. because for me, I was fighting against the systems that didn't want to work with me. They wanted to push me into the system and try and make me change to fit their system rather than trying to change the system to fit my needs. So I wanted to work with the individual. So that's why I yet again quit my job, moved back to the UK and started Indigo Hub, where now I work with children and adolescents and teens and young adults with ADHD and autism and all the other neurodivergence that come with it, and really about building their life so that they don't get to 27 and feel unworthy, feel like I didn't really know how to learn until I was 27 because I got the knowledge and I stopped forcing myself into systems and created the system for me. And I want that to happen to individuals. And I think that is where my key thing is. And I agree with Sarah Suzan with education is we've got to stop trying to force people into their systems. Rather, let's recreate our systems to help everyone because we need it. I know I needed it. And now I'm very passionate about this. So that's where my passion is to help. I feel like it's my mission from what I didn't have to give people what they need.
Yeah, that's wonderful work you people are doing. So as at Neurogifted, we have also been experimenting in this space because we don't have anywhere to learn from. And in recent times, we did find some success in, getting the buy-in from education institutions. And the worry now is nobody knows what what you need to do. So we are kind of inventing things or, making up things as we go along and dealing with situations as we face them. But I believe in terms of education, based on what you're saying, things are not very different, whether you're in India or in Britain. But in India, it's a system that is 170 years old, and it's so deeply entrenched, not just in the law, not just in the whole government and things like that, but it's also entrenched in the minds of people that this is the only way to learn. So where do you start? The question among most people here in Asia is, where do you start? Right? It's great that we have support like you people are giving to people from the outside for parents and neurodivergent students. But as an institution, where do we start? That's been a question that's been coming around a lot lately. Yeah, Suzan, please.
Yeah. I mean, for me, what I'm realizing is we start with the children. And the thing that is going to lead the movement in the UK, we've done lots and lots of work on big scales, and I have school systems, and all of them get me to do their training, and they all kind of come to the training day and say, wow, but then you go back and nothing changes. But what is changing in the UK is fundamentally the fact that children are voting with their feet, as are teachers. And when we start empowering those children and letting them know they have a choice, and reiterating the fact that the fact is children do things for one of three reasons. They want to, they're too scared not to, they want to please the person asking. So young people like myself and Sara and Natasha have always existed, and the young people you're talking about, what has changed is in the UK, it's now illegal to bully or coerce young children. And so they're trying to make the system tighter and more disciplined, not knowing that actually, if children don't want to, children aren't coming. And what's happening is they are voting with their feet and they are walking away from systems. And when we speak to teachers, and the message is so human, it's so human that the teachers are coming with them. And that's, I mean, fundamentally, our next piece of work we're a social enterprise, and our next piece of work is, do you know what? I've given up. People used to say to me, when are you starting the school? And I think, yeah, when am I starting? It's not the school I need. It's education brought to the children through passionate people that want to give it. And so we're starting a hub and spoke model in the UK that is going to be national, where anywhere there's 3 or 4 children who have said, I can't do this your way anymore. We go to them with trained teachers, with people that are support. So you've got people supporting the children, and then we have to support the people supporting the children. And I have somebody supporting me, and they have somebody supporting them, and that whole village to raise a child. It's going back to roots. It's going back to roots. And I think fundamentally where we start is reminding children that they have rights and they are free, and helping them have the voice to speak up in the healthiest way possible. Fundamentally, what happens at the moment, sorry, I will get off the pedestal in a second. What happens at the moment is children they tell us with their voice, and we all go, come on, you love school, and we take them in. And then they go, I sort of like this bit, and we treat school as if it's one entity. School is transitions, it's smells, it's sound, it's different rules, it's learning things that are boring, it's not being allowed to learn the things you found interesting, it's lots and lots of things. And they go, well, I like this, I like that. And then they go in, and then they tell us by taking ages, and they delay going in the morning, and they take ages to have their breakfast. We go, come on, you love school. And they go, yeah, I sort of do. I still want to please you. I still can. And they go in, and then they tell us by ailments. You get the stomach aches, sore throats. They're very common, the sore throats, because you're restricting. You're actually holding something down. And we go, come on, I know what you're doing. We give them the medicine and we send them in. And then they tell us by hurting themselves and others. And then we listen. And what they learn, because they're incredibly bright human beings, is the neural pathway develops. The quickest way in order for your needs to be met is by hurting yourself or others. And our job is to peel back and start listening when they tell us with their voice. And it's when we listen to the children us with their voice, and we don't even need to make seismic change. At first, all we need to do is listen and validate and say, you are right. What you're feeling is absolutely valid. What you're experiencing, yep, I believe you. I don't need to understand it. I don't need to know it. I don't need to feel it in order to respect it. You believing it and you telling me is enough, and we're going to act upon that. And that's where change happens, when they start realizing they have a right to their needs, and even more, they have a right to their wants. And that for me is the most natural start point.
Wonderful. Anyone wants to jump in, add to that? Yeah.
I just wanted to add in there about assumptions. People make assumptions like, you've got ADHD. Oh, you can't sit still then. When a lot of my kids can sit still when they're in the right environment. And for me, it comes down to the environment. We've got to stop trying to fix the person and start looking at the environment. My favorite quote is, when a flower doesn't bloom, you fix the environment in which it grows, not the flower. And we've got this thing of, we need to put this in place for the child, this in place. But what about, wait a minute, what about where the child is, who the child is talking to, what's going on? And I just find that we're human beings, we want to help, right? That's what we want to do. So we see a child in pain, let's go over and help them. Let's try and solve it for them. But what about what Suzan says? What about listening to them? Don't assume. Listen from that non-judgmental space, because that's when you can really start to see what is needed. And then when you listen, that's when you can start to see what's needed, but not with the child most of the time. It's with the stuff around. Because I've seen it, and I can probably guess Suzan and Sarah have seen it. When we have the right systems and things in place for us, not for them, for us, people can thrive, right? I do it now. 10 years ago, no. I mean, not every day, we're human, right? But I thrive now because of the environment. And I feel that the first step is really listening to people and not assuming that your experience is like them, or because they've got ADHD, it's like this. And then taking that step of looking at what can change in not always the person. Because I find that people have this stereotype or this thing, and understanding is important. But understanding ADHD doesn't mean that you're going to understand me or Suzan or Sarah, because we're three people, three very different humans, different strengths, different challenges. So it's, for me, I always think, like, the thing that people say is, people need training. Yeah, people do need that. But like Suzan said, it starts with the child, because they're going to know. They're going to know what they need. And then it's about looking around versus, okay, so that child needs that. Okay, so how do we change that child? No. How do we look around and take that step back?
Yeah, the environment is very critical.
Can I just add one time, that is so superb, but it's also listening in the way that they are able to tell you. As neurotypicals, we so often wait for the words. We so often wait for the neurotypical language. and expect them to know this thing when they haven't been asked what they want for so long. But completely and absolutely everything Natasha said to endorse that, but understanding that we're listening to them as a whole, as a holistic, we're watching them. By the time children come to us, do you know what? They have done everything in their power. They've learned every strategy they can. They are exhausted. By the time they're knocking on our door, it's up to those around them to take some responsibility and us to teach the child, you don't have to do this alone anymore.
Nice. Sarah, you were saying
Wow.
something, yeah. That's
I'm
wow.
so
Yeah.
I'm so glad to answer this last, because when you said it, I was like, oh my goodness, where do you even start with that question? And that's it, right? We're overwhelmed by that question. I think that Natasha and Suzan and I think we would all relate to being overwhelmed by that question, because all of us have come to this from the system's not working. Let's help individuals. Oh my goodness, I'm in that system. Then you get, well, I get imposter syndrome because I'm not medical. And then sometimes when I work with private medical people, it's great. Sometimes when I work with publicly funded medical people, it's not so great, because it feels sometimes like they're trained to look out for what is not happening so that they don't have to spend the money because there are budgetary restrictions. And I'm there as a private practitioner. So the systems, not only does the system not work, but the private and public system don't work together. I think that's an issue. But in order to not get overwhelmed, I know what I've had to do is look at the person in front of me. And that's what I'm imagining your teachers and professionals will have to do. I am imagining that when Natasha came back from Asia and had her first client, and Suzan started in her field, having been a head teacher and went into being an emotional regulation coach, I'm imagining that they also had to go, hang on, I'm just going to focus on this one person, because otherwise it is overwhelming. So if I had, say, a classroom or a cohort of teachers, I'd have to just look at them and what are the challenges facing them, and then I'd have to grow it from there. So I was thinking that one of the things I want to say is try not to get overwhelmed. Look at the people in front of you who you're trying to help now, because we can't change everything overnight. We certainly can't change a big system on our own. But if all of us focus on the person in front of us, and then the 10 people in front of us, and then the 100 people in front of us, year after year after year, between us, like a little patchwork quilt of neurodiversity support, we're growing something really special. Something else I would say is look for underachievers. So Suzan has talked about what to look out for, and how that might be put across. And the people I work with in a sort of therapeutic context, it tends to be people who are working so hard, trying, as Suzan said, every strategy in the book. But some people cannot achieve, given, as Natasha said, the system that they're being given to go through. So look for the underachievers and don't assume, also, as Natasha said, don't assume, just look for, hang on a second, I know this person is quite bright. Why are they not getting the grades I expected? You know, that is crushing for people. So look out for that and don't assume the worst. And also, because as neurodivergents, our communication style can be surprising and we can be triggering for neurotypical people. I know that myself, I know that my clients could come across sometimes as maybe being a bit belligerent or a bit stubborn or a bit, obstructive by asking lots of questions and desperately seeking some feeling of safety. But don't take that as a personal attack on you. Take that as approach that with curiosity and get to the bottom, because people don't just gratuitously fire questions at each other. Sometimes we're just looking for psychological safety. And I do think that if we all focus on our little bit, then we will get there, one practitioner at a time.
Oh, wonderful. That's so much to think about. And now, like I was saying, what about teachers? What do teachers, apart from listening, in terms of how they are representing the curriculum or the subjects? For example, in India, it's very strict. They have a calendar, academic calendar, and it's very clear what they're going to do on which day for how many minutes. So there's very little space, for them to do anything different. So what would you suggest for a teacher? I'll go with Suzan first. Yeah.
I mean, the first thing I would suggest is question the system as a teacher. Question how you're doing something and going, is it successful? What I've done for teachers in the UK is I have created a classroom adjustment list that I have used myself with 30 children of very, very complex needs, very, very complex and high volatile needs. And I go with the byline that anything that it's beneficial for all, but it is crucial for some. And that's my thing with it's using these blanket strategies that don't cost anything other than don't take things personally, other than please normalize the phrase, I'm sorry I zoned out, can you repeat that, with nobody getting offended. Normalize asking questions for clarification. Understand when we talk about autistic inference, and don't take the stereotypes. You see the child in front of you and you're going, well, they can't be autistic because they do infer meaning. But understanding that autistic comprehension before the age of 9 or 10, and that changing need before the age of 9 or 10, it was quite clear. They would ask things like, well, the girl in the blue jumper came in, and the question would be, what color was her jumper? As you grow and as the curriculum develops, the comprehension becomes, she said, good morning, and he grimaced. And they'll say that we don't understand what's being said, but really there's 1,000 things that could have happened. We need answers. And instead of actually answering the question, we're playing guess what's in the neurotypical's head. Because somehow neurotypicals have all decided on 3 or 4 acceptable answers. And so normalizing the asking of questions for an autistic who's obsessed with detail and pattern and logic and the truth, good enough isn't good enough. I can't think maybe that's the answer, but we get ashamed to ask questions, and we get shamed into, and because the other person's taking that as an affront. There's so many little things that we can do, really subtle ways of movement breaks. I mean, I can send over to the conference for anyone who needs it, all these free things that can happen. You don't want to draw attention. I used to have a book of bags, for example, heavy book of bags that hung up on the classroom door. And if I knew there was children that needed movement breaks all over the school, my class, I would send that book of bags to the library. I'd let the other teacher know that it was there. Another child would go and pick it up and take it to another classroom. And this book of bags for 3 years just went around, and people getting the movement breaks. They were getting the sensory breaks they needed. Understand the input, understand the sensory. I cannot stress enough how having a sensory friendly classroom, the teacher will feel better. And to help the teachers, it's helping them realize that even for their own outcomes, this isn't an either or. This isn't we have to choose mental health or academic success. Often when I'm talking to teachers or parents, I say the academic success is the least of our problems, not because mental health is more important, it is, but because academic capability is something, when you put the right environment in place, it's actually what we're very good at. We are brilliant at learning when the environment is correct. And so you get the mental health right, even by the measures that are so important to schools and education, they will improve. And I see our job, whether it's the parent or the teacher, is standing behind a teacher, standing behind those professionals that buy in with our hands behind their back as they get an avalanche of conflicting advice. Because they're afraid. When you do things differently, what you're actually saying is, I am taking accountability. I will be responsible if things go wrong. So even when you know the right thing to do, it can be very, very, very frightening, because you feel like your reputation's on the line, your job's on the line, everything's on the line. And while they start getting the results, our job is to hold the teachers and cradle them in their fear of why doing things differently. And so, and the advice is so conflicting. All the advice will be about exposure and desensitization and resilience and growth mindset. All of that is incredibly damaging to neurodivergent children. Even the whole, one of the things I used to get into most trouble with in the classroom is if I'd set the learning objectives and the success criteria in England, you'd put, this is what you mean. And then after they've met all the success criteria, we were meant to give them a development point. To somebody that's trying their best, that doesn't sound like, have you thought of this? It sounds like you still haven't done enough, you missed something, and we go and beat ourselves up over it. So questioning these initiatives, looking at a neurodivergent child, we're all meant to achieve a certain amount over a 5-day period. If you hyper-focus, have special interests and like to buckle down and do things, you achieve that in 2 days. But what you need is then to stare at the sky for 3 days. But instead, people go, well, you did it on Monday and Tuesday. You now have to do it on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. And then we become victims of our own success because we can't work at a pace because it bores us and we lose interest. We don't want to show you what we're capable of because then you'll expect us to run a marathon every day. And we can't do it. And then when we burn out, they go, but now you're just misbehaving. You did it last year. And it's more, and it's the understanding that these skills, they wear away when the more you use them. It's so I'll hand over now. But
I was just going to say as well, that makes me think we need a lot more understanding of pathological demand avoidance as well. I think there's so little out there, and it's we've got a few people in our team with PDA, and it's really interesting the different outcomes when you work with it and don't ignore it, because otherwise it becomes the elephant in the room, I think. And you just work with it. It's absolutely incredible how transformative it is when you work with it, I think.
That's true. Yeah. So now just shifting gears, we also are going to talk a little bit about workplaces and as adults who are having careers, whether it's entrepreneurship or a job. So how does one begin to advocate wherever you are, just in life?
How does one advocate for themselves in any
For
context
themselves,
in life?
wherever they are, in society, in family, in any situation, how does that begin? Because I find it very difficult. I haven't been able to break through anywhere in my family.
Right. Okay. Well, I think Suzan and Natasha may agree with the fact that self-advocating is one thing. Self-advocating to your family can be quite another.
Whole different game. Yeah.
And I think my personal view on this is that when you're under someone's nose for decades before you have a diagnosis, they think, well, you're just Sara, so what's changed? Why do we need to see you as any different? And this comes up all the time. I think there's also, we take people for granted, and when people are under our nose, we tend to think we know everything about them. And we really don't. We don't sometimes have a clue. And sometimes I meet parents of teenagers who say, well, of course they weren't masking, they were with us. And I say, well, up until the point where they're in their bedroom with the door shut, they're masking. And even then they're still masking because they're worried you're going to knock on the door and come and ask them random questions with no warning. But they're our child, they're at home. Yes, I know. That's how much we mask. So I think there needs a lot more understanding. But in my take on self-advocacy is you can't self-advocate unless you've got some language for what's going on with you, and unless you accept it in yourself. I think it always surprises me when I look back at the end of each year and I think what has made the biggest difference to people this year. It tends to be self-acceptance that goes quite far down the line in helping people. And then I think you can really self-advocate then, because it's amazing how, especially on the ADHD side, we get our rejection sensitivity. But actually that changes a lot when we really accept ourselves. I mean, it really does start when you can't accept yourself if you don't understand yourself. And you can't advocate for something that you don't have any words for and you don't believe in yourself. You have to get your own buy-in before you try to get other people's buy-in. But then I think there comes a point where you've got to remember you're not trying to do a customer service or a sales job on people. There are people that will never want to know. There are people who will never care. There are people who are indifferent. There are people who find your labels triggering. The fact that you have to self-advocate can be irritating for people. So I think partly it's accepting yourself and self-advocating, but I always say to people, advocate once or twice, but don't do it a third time. That third time that your mum or whoever says that I just don't get it, they don't get it. Leave it, move on, because we're not here to be our own public relations teams.
Yeah, that's true. Anybody else wants to add to that?
Yeah, I just want to add that I always find that when you get to being an adult, people go, right, so you've got ADHD, what do you need? And then people go, I've asked that before, what do you need? And then they literally, it's like a rabbit in headlights, because we've never been given that option of we need this or we need that. So when it comes to self-advocacy, I think the first thing is knowledge of yourself. We don't know what we don't know, right? Because if you don't know what you need, because as an education, that's never been, 100% with what Suzan was saying is, we all deserve this and we all need different things. But when you've been taught one way, you've got to do it like this, you think that you almost think that you are, I just don't fit into that. So you don't give yourself permission to think that you need something different when you've been in that system. And it is about kind of the self-knowledge and then the self-acceptance of, I've got to learn about myself, and then I have to give myself permission to do it. And then only then you can then advocate for yourself. Because I get a lot of people like, oh, I've got ADHD. Oh, I need a fidget toy. And then they're like, oh, okay, I'll give you a fidget toy. And I've seen it with kids when they give them blue tack now. And then after 2 days, the kids stop using the blue tack. And the teacher goes to them like, why, I don't really need it. And it's that thing of, yet again, assuming. We're assuming what people, because they've got ADHD, need. And when you don't know about yourself, you kind of, oh, I've got ADHD, I might need this fidget toy. But if you don't actually need it, then, you know, and that's the thing about when you've got that self-acceptance and that self-knowledge of what it is that you actually struggle with, what it is that you're really good at, because we're talking about challenges here, but there's so many strengths we're good at. What can we use here to help with our challenges, right? And then, only then can we then advocate for ourselves. And then when you've got that self-acceptance, it's accepting that, like Sarah said, not everybody's going to get it. And that is another level of acceptance. The acceptance, I call it, kind of, you know, social awareness starts with ourselves. We start with self-awareness, then we go to social awareness. And it's the same with acceptance. We've got to have self-acceptance and then the world around us acceptance. Because like here, we're here voicing these things and advocating for people like us. But not everybody is going to get that. Not everybody's going to be willing. And that's okay. And my coach said to me that I really love, we are a gift and we get to choose who we share that with. And at first I thought, oh, that's really selfish. No, it's not. We are all a gift and we get to share that with who we want. That's but first beautiful. We've got to unwrap our gifts. I know, I thought so. It's got my wall. Because we are a gift and we've got to unwrap that ourselves to then go, right, here you go. And we have a right and we deserve to do that, but the world says that we don't. And that's the thing that I really believe. You can't advocate for ourselves if we don't believe we deserve it.
And then just to lead on from the deserve bit, I find that the biggest challenge for self-advocacy is firstly, it's the internalized ableism of but just let me fit in, then we'll work on the rest. And then the difference between fitting in and belonging is a really big thing that when I'm working with anybody really of any age, where they don't want to stand out and it's very hard to self-advocate. And I find that it can be incredibly helpful to pick apart first the fears of the society that made them hide, so that they can start understanding that the thing that made them hide wasn't that there was anything deficient within them, but it was the fears of society. And when we look at society compassionately and say why they have made us hide, why our parents pushed us into masking, why the system pushed us into masking, and it's that whole thing about forgiving for yourself, not for them. And when you start understanding they didn't do it because there was anything wrong with you, they did it because of whatever it created within them. That can be a really powerful first step to self-acceptance and self-understanding, because you stop seeing yourself as broken. One of the big barriers I have with young people is teachers always say, but they don't want to stand out. They don't want to stand out. And the first thing I always say is, look, just put the things in place. And when they start using them, they'll forget they say they didn't need to stand out. When they've got a safe place to go, they won't relate it to that conversation. They'll need the safe place because they need it by that point. And it's helping, before we can self-advocate, is normalizing need as a universal thing. And so because if you see yourself as needy and the neurotypicals as the ones that need to accommodate your need, you're presenting yourself as something that's broken, something that's less, something that's deficient. Even the language around that, even if we want to use all these things about different, not less, and talk about superpowers, actually it's all a little bit infantilizing. But when we make need a universal thing, anyone that's heard my podcast would have heard the thing about we can't fly, because as humans we've all accepted we can't fly. Nobody goes around lamenting their arms. And when I'm working with young people or with anybody, I say, look, if I take my glasses off and you put an exam paper in front of me and an exam paper in front of someone else, we're not on an equal playing field, not because I'm autistic or have ADHD, because I can't see a thing without my glasses, right? If I put them on, you've equalized the playing field. And I always give the example of, for example, my old PA wasn't autistic, and if I didn't do lots of pleasantries in emails, it really upset her, thinking she'd made me. So she needed lots of small talk. I needed to ask about her Auntie Jean, and I needed to. Otherwise, I didn't know she'd spend a week crying, thinking she was going to get fired. She needed that connection, that feeling. Whereas my new PA, if I started doing that to her, she'd quit. If you say, how are you? That means I have to say, how are you? Instead of, here's the file you asked. And just normalizing need as a human thing is our first step. We all need different things. And neither is superior nor inferior. It just is. It's just a fact. And when we start not being ashamed of that need, because everyone has needs, then you can start the journey of understanding your needs, to self-acceptance. When you have the strategies, there's this big thing about the anxiety and depression, and something I'm always saying is, it's not that life is hard, so we're anxious and depressed. We're anxious and depressed because life is hard. And so when you're asking us what we need while we're anxious and depressed, what we know about anxiety is our reasoning, our logic cannot kick in. So we can't tell you. We're in survival mode. What we need is to feel safe. That's it, right? And so when we create that safety, then we understand it, we accept it, suddenly you're open to the strategies. And once you start using those strategies, life feels a little bit less hard, and you feel less incompetent because you're no longer in survival mode, and then you thrive. And so it's, before we have safety, we can't have anything else. Before self-advocacy, we have to advocate for, we have to create environments that normalize need in all humans, and move on from there.
Yeah. So I also wanted to ask you about what kind of support have you been seeing, been giving to people who are working in organizations? Anyone providing support? Because I'm involved in a couple of projects in organizations, and we see that they need a lot of support, not just the neurodivergent employees, but also the managers, the supervisors. So there's a lot of preparation before they can even hire. But what we've seen is companies have gone ahead and hired people without knowing what to do with it, and how to go about doing things, and that's become a major problem.
Yeah.
So has anyone has a story about that? And
I do quite a lot in that area. So a lot of the speaking and workshops and things I do are through that, and also the some of the coaching is through the workplace. I get asked things like, could you come and do a workshop, because we know that one of the team is neurodivergent and it's creating issues that they are perceived as being treated differently. Could you come in and do some equality awareness? Could you come in and do some neurodiversity awareness? So there's awareness, which I'm very, very understanding of, because we have to have awareness, but I'm also very conscious it has to move past that level quite quickly. Also, I get asked things like employing, retaining, talent. So how do we get people, how do we attract neurodivergent talent, and how do we keep the talent we have without subscribing to the superpower narrative? And how can we be genuinely inclusive so people feel comfortable? I'm very fortunate because the organizations I work with to date have all been very, their initiatives have been very, very thought through. There's been a budget, there's been genuine intention, there's been time that's been dedicated. I haven't once been put forward for anything that has been tick boxy, which is that's a real godsend, because that was my fear when I started doing more and more in the corporate space. I couldn't work with an organization that didn't really mean it. I get a lot of questions about people personally and their personal journey, and also people in the workplace. They tend to be going to work very worried about neurodivergent children. So I go to companies to talk. Recently, I went to a big pharmaceutical company, but most of the questions were people there doing a day's work and actually worried sick about their little one they were going home to, and what kind of day they were having at school. And that, I think, is a real lesson on how we are 24/7, 360-degree people. We don't just go to work and unvelcro the neurodiversity from ourselves. And a lot of the people in the workplace, the reason that they are questioning their neurodiversity is because they are going through diagnosis with their children. And I think that over here in the UK, there are all sorts of things now that are expected to be picked up in the workplace. One of them is domestic violence and looking for the signs. But I think also wellness in general is becoming a thing. And luckily companies are investing in it. But generally it is recruitment, retaining people. It's making sure their environment is psychologically safe. We're doing a lot now, I would say, over here on psychological safety in general. And then there's a lot of the personal angle, because you take your whole self to work.
Yes. That was good. Yes.
I just wanted to add. Oh, sorry.
Yeah. You go ahead, Natasha. Yes.
Oh no, she just sparked something. I get excited. We're interesting beings. She just said it's just like what we're talking about education. Like it's no different. Like, so I got asked to do some training when I was in Asia, and it was like, okay, can you come in and do some training? And I said, okay, well, what sort of training? Like, who are you? It was in education, but who are you children? What are your staff like? Well, no, just some education, just some awareness on neurodiversity. Okay, but like, and it's the same thing again. I feel like there's a thing going through this kind of session of it's different in different environments. Yet again, it's different with different people. And we can go in and do awareness and, things, but that's just the surface. That's not going deeper, because every individual needs different things. That, one of my clients recently went into a thing. They were like, oh, you've got autism, here's some headphones. And she was like, no, I actually don't like headphones. And they were like, what? But you're autistic, like you need headphones. She's like, I don't need headphones. Like, I actually like the noise. She's quite extroverted. She loves noise. The silence actually is actually sensory, because she's hypersensitive, not hyper. So, and that's the thing, it's the assuming again. So with training, yet again, it's personalizing it around that business, around what that business or institution needs, and around those employers. So I know a few businesses that I work with here have things like neurodiversity groups that are run by neurodivergents that are putting things in strategy for the needs of the actual staff that work there, not just to tick a box and like, oh, we've got some, neurodivergent policies in place. And I really think it's yet again, like what Suzan goes back to, that listening to the person, listening to what the people need. So initiatives that do, have neurodivergent groups that are run by the neurodivergent in that company, and then they can bring people in when they feel like there's a need. But every company needs very, very different things. We can have that basis of like the well-being and things like that, because that's a basis of what everybody needs. Because not only neurodivergent people struggle with worrying about their kids at home, what we're going to have for dinner tonight, or someone dies in their family. We all have these things, neurotypical or neurodivergent, but it's the specialized things that we need to put in place. Like Suzan said, that everybody can benefit from, that some need to come from the some, because they're the people that are going to be able to voice it.
Yeah,
Absolutely. And sorry, I always have something to say. If you please feel free to cut it all out if you need to. And just kind of leading on from that is when I've worked with corporations, and fundamentally it's the answer is the same, as Natasha's saying, the answer is the same, whether I'm dealing with a child, a couple, a family, a business, a huge business. It's what do we have in front of us? And don't forget the level of undiagnosed need we have, the level of people that are ashamed to even admit they have issues, so they don't know that they're neurodivergent. And so when I worked with businesses, I said, just get your team in. And it was really funny. It reminded me of a story. I had someone say to me, so what's your system? So I don't have a system. What are you going to do? I don't know. I haven't met your team yet. But you must have a system. I need to know what you're going to do. And I said, I'm really sorry, I don't have one. He said, the other person had one. I said, which is why you've booked me this time. And it's and it's like, give me your team, and this is what we're good at, and this is the brilliant ADHD pattern finding and the autistic attention to detail. And I go, everybody in your team, forget your job title, forget what you're meant to be doing, forget what you should be doing. And this applies to everyone. If we forget all the shoulds, write down on a day-to-day everything that is incorporated in your day, from making a cup of tea to emails to big business to making £1 million decisions. And then go through with a highlighter and go, which of these really energize you? And which of these drain you to the point where you put it off, you're not doing your other work because you've got this thing to do. And then just look around your team and swap your reds and greens, right? It's the simplest thing ever. Why are you, if you're working as a team, why are you forcing somebody to take, for me, if I have to write an email, I say to clients all the time, I say, look, if you need fluff, it'll take me about a week. If you're happy for me to send a subject heading and the attachments, you can have it in 10 minutes. I don't actually mind which, okay? And most of the time they choose the attachment because they know that I'm not being rude. But it's giving people choice. And so why are we making, if I was in a company and they were making me write the fluffy emails, it'll take me an hour to do a 2-minute email that Sandra loves doing or Jake loves doing or and loves that interaction. So just swap them over, right? That's your first job. Let's work to people's strengths. Let's stop. It's all about acceptance and compassion for ourselves first. Then we're not ashamed to say I find something hard, and acceptance and compassion for someone else. I'm not going to judge you. I've got an IQ of 147. I've always been judged on the fact that I can't tie my shoelaces. And when you spend your life being judged on the fact that you can't tie your shoelaces, it takes a long time to see the value in being really, really intelligent, because you're going, nobody else sees it. They just know that I find this really boring, fiddly thing really hard, and they're judging me on that. So it's acceptance, compassion, understanding. It all roots back to the same thing. Stop working to people's weak points, work to their strengths. And then
yeah, can I jump in on that?
Yeah.
I'm getting all excited now.
Yeah.
These ladies get my head sparking. So yeah, I wanted to say, yeah, get familiar with the spiky profile, because I think that what Suzan is describing is such a massive part of our experience. And it wasn't until I did my own IQ test recently that I went through all the weird feelings of having a spiky profile. I've always had one, and I've had underachievement in my life. I've had overachievement in my life, but when I did an IQ test that told me I had 100% in visual perception and analytical thinking, but I had 15% in other areas, it was this very kind of, I felt quite bereft. I was kind of grieving things I didn't have, but I was also quite impressed with other parts, and then very confused ultimately when looking at the whole. And I needed to go through that because increasingly at Wired Differently, we attract gifted clients. I would say that most of our clientele would be classed as gifted. But the other thing I wanted to say, which goes back to what Suzan was saying, is I do not understand why job carving is not a thing. And we do this at Wired Differently. So people come along with all the transferable skills I want them to have, bearing in mind that we operate in a niche. Neurodiversity itself is not massively recognized in wider society here in the UK, as well as other places in the world. I know sometimes people look to the UK, but you know, we have a long way to go here. But we're in a niche, so I take people with transferable skills. I obviously vet them and do all my due diligence, but essentially I'm training them in something that doesn't massively exist elsewhere. A lot of our projects are things that just don't exist elsewhere. And so we do job carving. And the minute I get wind that someone is not within their comfort zone, I say, well, is that a reasonable challenge where you would benefit from upskilling? Or is that something that's actually a bit unbearable or boring or something that's intolerable for you? I get it doing it. You get. So we do job carving, and the rule we have at Wired Differently is that 80% of your role you have to be able to fulfill. And if you need to shop out the other 20% to a colleague, it's absolutely fine. And there's no shame, there's no competition. We have a flat structure. And I just do not know why that is not a thing in companies. I just don't see it. And it needs to be, because the way that job descriptions and person specifications are written is very arbitrary. What we do is we regularly audit the company for the skills it's missing, and then we find these weird and wonderful combinations of skills in people, and then we hire them accordingly. But we don't say, this is the job, do you fit 99% of this? Because well, for a start, in a new sector, the benefit is if you work that way, you're going to fail. And I think that forces you to be innovative in your processes.
Wow. Thank you. That was really, really good. You know, we can go on and, you know, I thought suddenly I have a feeling that we were just getting ready to move from here. it was just getting really, really interesting. I don't want to leave this conversation, but I think we've reached our time limit. So thank you so much, Sarah, Suzan, Natasha, for contributing to the Neurodiversity India Summit. We look forward to a lot of collaboration in future, and we look forward to learning from each other. So thank you so much. We're thankful for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.